Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
New on Curiosity Stream.
I'm James Burke. I'm going to take you on a journey through time.
James Burke's visionary series returns, reimagined for our time.
Now, this is all uncharted territory.
The Washington Post hails Burke as one of the most intriguing minds in the Western world. The New York Times raves he careens from one great moment in history to another.
Where do we want to go from here?
Experience all new Connections.
So what's the next connection?
With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hello, thinkers. It's me, your girl, your host, Elena Grace, and you're listening to another episode of I've Been Thinking. So, as always, thank you very much for that. We love having you here. We love filling your feed and your ears with chaos and critical thought and creativity and everything in between. So, I appreciate you being here. Now, today's episode is a really fun one. It is with Adam, my partner, boyfriend, partner in crime, arch enemy, whatever you want to call him. He is our guest host today. Not really guest host, he's our guest. Guest commentator, if you will. Okay, Adam doesn't talk very much. But he did way better on this episode than he has on some past ones, so we're loving that. He is so much fun. I love telling him about really niche things like I did in today's episode. And so, without further ado, today's episode is about Lupercalia. It is the ancient Roman festival of, well, you'll find out. And it is considered by some to be a precursor to Valentine's Day, which is why it's what we're talking about today. You know, getting a little seasonal. You'll get some fun, cute Elena and Adam bickering in this episode, classic, but also some really interesting research that I did about the holiday and, really the festival and everything that it's associated with, that we know about, and all of the history of it. It's so interesting. And I highly encourage you, if this episode sparked any interest for you, if you were like, wow, I want to know more about that, whatever, highly recommend you go on your own deep dives about it, because there's so much more interesting stuff that I did not include for various reasons, like because I couldn't find it substantiated in multiple places, that kind of thing. I did mention a few things like that, but in general, there's so much to this festival that I couldn't even put in this episode. So highly recommend you go read more about it, watch something about it, whatever there is about it, go consume that, because this is wild, absolutely wild. But it's so fun, it's so interesting. And also I do want to add that I mentioned in the episode, but I did some similar stuff to this episode. It was a much shorter Patreon exclusive video episode last Valentine's Day, where I talk about the history of the holiday Valentine's Day specifically. So some of the theories about where it came from, yada yada. So if you're interested in learning more about that or learning more about super niche topics like that, definitely go check out our Patreon. You can subscribe for as little as $2 a month. And for $2, you get early and ad-free. For $5 and $10, then you get exclusive content that is only found on Patreon. So if that is interesting to you, if more niche stuff like this is interesting to you, go to patreon.com/I've been thinking, or follow the links. It's in the show notes. It's on the website. It's on the Instagram, everywhere. Follow those links because Patreon is a lot of fun. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoy, and happy Valentine's Day. Love you guys so much. Here's Adam. So what was your question?
What am I doing here?
I am going to tell you. Well, so you come on for kind of holiday specials, right? Mm-hmm. That's exactly what you said to me last night. You said, I thought I was a holiday special guy. This is a holiday special, Adam. This is a Valentine's Day.
It's not like a main holiday. You know? From a man's perspective, he is not cared for on this holiday.
I literally asked you what you want for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to care for you. That's my point. That's my point. So,
proceed.
We're going to be talking about Lupercalia, which... What? Don't read my notes.
Sorry.
Don't read them. You always do that. So we're going to be talking about Lupercalia.
Okay.
And that is...
the study of leprosy.
No. That, for some, has been thought to be an origin of Valentine's Day. And we're going to talk about that, okay?
So it's not defined?
It is, but we'll get there. We'll get there, okay? But first, remember...
Alamo.
Remember the Alamo. So, you and I watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina together, right?
Yes.
So, do you remember the episode where they are, instead of Valentine's Day, they're celebrating this, like, dark version where they go out into the woods, they draw names out of a basket, they're randomly matched up, a witch with a warlock, and they, first, there's this whole thing where they, go in the woods. They've got baskets. This is what happens in the show. They've got baskets, and they've got, oysters and milk and blood in the basket. And the milk and the blood represent purification, and the oysters, and it has figs in the basket, too. The oysters and figs are for fertility and virility. And then there are cherries in there as well. And the cherries are for popping. Absolutely awful.
Is that what that says?
That's literally what this fucking says right here.
Wow.
And it says, the pair are warned not to stray from the path to keep safe from the lust-filled creatures that stalk the woods. And the couple first smears the blood upon each other's forehead. Then it gets wiped off. And after they, complete this whole ritual, they lay side by side under the moon for the entire night. They're completely, abstinent. It's basically like a slow burn thing, I think, is the idea there. And then at the end of everything, then there's, a hunt where, the next event is... the young witches, they put on red cloaks. Again, this is what happens in the show. They put on red cloaks and chase after their male partners who are wearing wolf costumes. And so Red Riding Hood and the wolf. Do you remember this episode?
Part of it.
Okay.
But I just know you ain't catching me.
Oh, baby. I'd be catching you. And then at the end... there's an orgy. Okay.
What?
So
That wasn't in the show?
It was hinted at in the show.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was hinted at. So, in real life, historically, hold on, let me pull this guy over here. Oh no. Historically, Lupercalia is an ancient Roman festival and feast, and it was celebrated every year on February 15th. Okay? The origins of it are incredibly obscure, but it is known that it was like put on by and supervised by the priesthood of Lupercalia. I had to double check it.
So the priesthood was hosting orgies.
Kind of. We'll get there. I'll tell you more about the celebration. But yeah, that is who put on the whole festival. Do you want to eat that Reese cup before we keep going?
I'm fine.
Okay. I really struggled with finding out much about the priesthood of the Lupercalia, but there's like not a lot of records about them, okay? Not a lot of records that are like the sources on them are reliable online, you know? At least that I could find. I'm sure there are probably more, but just what I could find as I was writing this episode. But some sources did say that it was one of the most ancient of the Roman priesthoods, which I thought was pretty cool. And I also think it's really interesting that it's unknown exactly what their whole situation was, like what they were a priesthood of.
Like denomination?
I mean, if you will. So, like, you know, there were priests of Jupiter. The name translates basically to the Brotherhood of the Wolf, right? Mm-hmm. Lupercalia. As we know, Lupin, Luper, Lupa, like that's
Lupus.
Lupus. Yeah, that is Latin for wolf. So obviously that's the base word. So, there are theories though, and I'm actually really excited about this, because I just found it earlier today when I was like finishing up the research. I think this is brilliant. Okay. It just feels right to me. So there are theories that it could have something to do with a cult of breastfeeding. So, the rites of Lupercalia are confined to the Lupercal Cave, which is supposedly the cave where Romulus and Remus were nursed by a she-wolf. So Romulus and Remus were the legendary founders of Rome. They were abandoned as babies. They were found by the river god, and they were delivered to this cave where they were discovered by a she-wolf and nursed and raised by her. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, wolf. Nursing. Okay? So we've got that. Furthermore, near the entrance of the cave, the Lupercal Cave, there was a sanctuary, like a shrine of Rumina, the goddess of breastfeeding. And outside of the cave was the legendary wild fig tree, which was supposedly the one that the river god brought baby Romulus and Remus to be rescued. Like, it's part of the legend, this specific wild fig tree. And to top it off, okay, I think this is a super strong theory. I'm super into it. To top it off, wild figs are a pendulous fruit, rather like a boob, you know? And
I was thinking water balloon.
Okay, well, if, you know, some boobs are shaped like that too. And if cut, the tree exudes a milky sap. Milky sap? Milky sap. Breastfeeding. I think we solved the mystery.
What is a breastfeeding cult, though? That's thrown me for.
That's a great question. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. But
They just milking all these women?
So, here's my theory that I've developed in the past hour. Okay. Is that it's not so much a breastfeeding cult, like, per se, about the fetishization of breastfeeding or about that kind of thing, but that it's about the worship of fertility and of, like, a woman's vitality of life. Like giving life to the child, like the she-wolf, the lupus, gave to the babies Romulus and Remus, right? She nursed them so that they could grow up and become the legendary founders of Rome. And then we've got these other symbols of breastfeeding and of motherhood. So it makes sense. So then, also, I do want to throw this fun fact in here. I kind of forgot until just now. Famous members include Mark Antony. You know, Julius Caesar's BFF / murderer. Yeah, Mark Antony was a member. Isn't that fun?
Interesting.
Right? So, the name of the festival and its priesthood, like we've talked about, is derived from the word lupus, or the Latin word for wolf, which, like we've said, suggests an association with the she-wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus. I would argue that this association is further cemented by the fact that the ritual part was not, like, the ritual hosted by the brothers of Lupercalia, however it's pronounced. I did not look it up. I would argue that the rituals, or because the rituals were only like supervised and practiced in 3 places. They were completely confined to Palatine Hill, the Lupercal Cave, and the Roman Forum, which are all places integral to the myths of the founding of Rome. So the fact that the ritual parts supervised by the priesthood were confined to those places, I think that makes it obvious that it is about the founding of Rome, you know?
Yeah.
Like that the traditions come back to that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I feel like that's substantial enough to say that's probably a good case to be made.
I mean, I think even the 2 dudes sucking on the wolf is weird too, so.
2 dudes sucking on a she-wolf.
Yeah.
5 feet apart because they're
Brothers.
Okay, but it's also interesting, though, because apart from this association with Romulus and Remus and the founding of Rome, there is also a likely association with an ancient deity who was known to protect herds of livestock from wolves. So I didn't find the name of that deity, unless the reference made to that was in reference to the god Faunus, who has also been linked in research that I found. And Faunus was, you know the god Pan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Faunus was the Greek version. So this is happening in Rome. And so I think Faunus's association is a little bit more in the countryside, is where we see more of his association with the tradition. But still, it's super interesting because he is a rural Italian deity who, like I said, can be associated or identified with the Greek god Pan. And he was worshipped in the countryside as a patron of fertile fields and flocks. And, like Pan, was portrayed as half man, half goat, and was associated with merriment and revelry. So, for these reasons, seems like, a decent collab there. But what seals the deal? Okay, you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, what seals the deal is that at Lupercalia, youths, i.e. young men, youths would put on goat costumes at some points. And some points they were totally naked and would run through the streets in his honor.
So a reason to streak.
A reason to streak. That's exactly what
And
Lupercalia
celebrate.
was. Yeah. So,
I can get down with that.
right? It feels like a vibe, honestly. Kind of more of a vibe than like the pressure of perfect Valentine's Day presents and dinner.
Just go streaking.
Streaking and then eat some goat and then orgy.
Yeah, I'm not sold on the last part.
That's kind of good. I'm kind of glad for that.
Yeah.
Okay. So every Lupercalia celebration began with the sacrifice of goats and a dog by the...
No.
I know, I knew you'd be upset. So the Luperci priesthood, two of the priests, so they would sacrifice the two goats and a dog, and then two of the priests would be naked, and they would have blood from the sacrifice wiped across their head with the sacrificial knife. So the knife would be used to put blood on their head, okay? And then, after the blood's on there, it would be cleaned off of their head with wool dipped in milk.
So now they just got milk on them.
Yeah, no, they just got milk on. I bet they're sticky after this, you know? So this all has like, meaning behind every step, of course. And then after the head has been wiped with the milk, they were required to laugh. Like that was the end of the ritual, was the two young men
Ominous.
had to laugh. It is kind of ominous, isn't it?
I think it's just one big old scheme for pervy priests to have an orgy.
I mean, maybe. But also it was like, these were like 20 to 40-year-olds. These weren't like old men. And it wasn't people who were like chaste in everyday life. Chaste. They're not virginal in their day-to-day lives. They're not, what's the word? Abstinent. God, that's the word I was looking for.
Virginal.
That's the word I was looking for in the first
Sounds
place.
like a cleaner.
You sound like a cleaner. So, it's not like weird old priests who can only break their abstinence once a year,
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're talking Mark Antony was
Still
in
be
this
pervy.
club. I'm not saying they can't be pervy. I'm just saying, like, they're not lusting for the women. Since when do you have a better vocabulary than me?
I is smart.
I is smart. You're just putting words together better than I am today. So, moving on. Afterwards, after the laughter ensued, a feast would follow, and then the Luperci would cut strips of skin from the sacrificial animals to be carried. They were called thongs, or like there was a Greek word for, or
Thongs.
yeah, or an Italian word for it. But that's literally what they're heavily referred to as thongs. But it's kind of like a whip, okay? And the young men typically would, so it depends on my source. Sometimes it was the priests would do this. Sometimes it was just like young men in general. But they would strip down naked and they would run around the hill and they would strike the whips at women nearby. And getting hit by the whip was supposed to make a woman fertile. So in the very traditional like celebration of Lupercalia, where it's like the priests, and it's in Rome, and it's in the Lupercal cave, and it's all of that. It was the priests who ran around the hill, and they were naked.
Whipping people.
Whipping women. And at some points in history, the women were naked also.
You're just strengthening my theory.
That is just pervy priests?
Yes.
I mean, maybe. And then I thought this was interesting, though. If a woman got hit by the whip, it was supposed to make her fertile, right? If she was already pregnant, it was supposed to give her ease in childbirth.
Oh.
Isn't that nice?
I thought you were going to say something like an abortion.
No, why? It's a fertility festival.
What?
Why would it do the opposite?
I don't know. It was just what came to mind.
All right. So, I do think it's super interesting that the priests running through the streets in celebration of Lupercalia and the youths running through the streets in celebration of Faunus conflate like that. Like, in the research, like I said, in some, like, it seemed from what I found that in Rome it was definitely the priests, but maybe in the countryside it was the youths. Like, I wonder if it was the same records and it's just phrased unclearly, or if that's conflated somehow.
They probably changed it to the youths because the priests were being pervy.
I mean, maybe. You could be right. But there's another part of the festival that is heavily disagreed upon too. Maybe not heavily. I don't know. I'm unsure where I stand on this. So when I was talking to you about the episode of Sabrina the Chilling Adventures, I told you about the part where they draw names and they get matched up, right? Remember?
Yeah.
Okay. So that has traditionally been believed to be a part of the real historic Lupercalia, where men would draw women's names from a jar and they would be paired up for the duration of the festival. And sometimes they would stay together until the next year's festival, just kind of like married for a year or like dating for a year, and then they draw a name the next year and do it all over again.
Well, I wouldn't want that. What if you got a bad one?
Well, you don't have to stay with them. It just sometimes happened.
No thanks.
And then sometimes the pairing would be so good, though, that they would get married and they would actually like fall in love, and it was just randomly, literally name out of a jar. Isn't that interesting? Like, so that is recorded, but there are some theories, some researchers who actually don't think that happened. And there are some that say that didn't happen at all, probably. Like, that there's no record of any matchmaking lottery at all.
Well, if there's no record, how are people coming up with these theories?
That's what I want to know. Like, it's such a strong part of the history of the holiday. I want to know, like, that's literally something I found in one article, and like two different scientists or historians in one article said there's no record of it. I'm like, 2 out of a whole lot feels like...
Maybe the others are just hopeless romantics.
Maybe they're hopeless romantics, or maybe the other ones are mad because their name didn't get pulled in a past life.
Oh, and they figured that out.
Yeah, they figured it out.
Wouldn't that be nice to know? Past life.
And they're like, well, I've got that past life regression tincture in there. Do you want to do it?
I meant like real stuff.
Yeah, I'm talking about real stuff, Adam.
Oh.
So... Eventually, the naked part kind of faded out of popularity for various reasons, but they started like actually wearing clothes as they whipped women, and the women who were being whipped started wearing clothes and all that stuff. So there's that. But the festival as a whole definitely kept its dignity and its revelry. It remained a feast day with drinking and lovemaking and fertility rites at the center of everything, just ultimately kind of more clothed, right? So then, we all know how things go when Christianity moves in and becomes more popular and more powerful. The pagan rites eventually become transferred into Christian ones. But the evolution of Lupercalia into Valentine's Day is actually very unclear, and they actually might not have anything to do with each other at all. But
now it's just a big old marketing campaign.
But the thing is that Lupercalia, I think I mentioned this earlier, was traditionally celebrated on the 15th of February. So it does feel too coincidental to me that we've got the 14th and the 15th. This ancient holiday, a newer holiday named after a Christian martyr, feels too coincidental that they're right there together, you know? Words, you're on a podcast.
My bad. I think they're the same thing.
So I thought they were. I actually looked up my research from a Patreon episode I did last Valentine's Day, where I talked about some of the origins of Valentine's Day specifically. And so Valentine's Day, wasn't associated with love and romance until, the 14th century, when Chaucer wrote a poem about, and referred to somebody as his Valentine. And then, Shakespeare made some references to somebody as a Valentine, two lovers, one as the other's Valentine. And then there was a French nobleman who referred to his lover as his Valentine. But, this is all happening 14th century. That's the beginning of Valentine's association with romance. And it's not even the holiday specifically. It's the term My Valentine.
Right.
And then eventually, obviously, the feast day of St. Valentine would become associated with romance because of that, because of this pop culture surge, basically. But the thing is, there's, and in this old research, I was pretty steadfast, and you can watch the video. All my Patreon subscribers, you can watch the video where I'm talking about it. Anybody who wants to watch the video, check out my Patreon, where I'm talking about it. And I'm it's too coincidental for me. The anthropologist in me says that they're connected. The historian in me says they're connected. But I'm just been thinking more about it, and I don't know. I really don't know how connected they are. Because, yeah, it's coincidental, but is it?
Yes.
But so the last records of the celebration of Lupercalia is from the end of the 5th century Christian era.
That's the most recent?
No. The last celebration of Lupercalia as the ancient ritual with the brotherhood, the priesthood of the Luperci, all of that in Rome, right?
And then the next thing for Valentine's Day is until 14th.
So, Valentine's Day was established as a feast day not long after. So, the Pope who created a day in honor of the Christian martyr Saint Valentine, he lived around the same time, around the 5th century. But again, so Lupercalia, traditionally romance, fertility, sex, all these things. St. Valentine's Day wasn't associated with romance or love or sex or any of those things until the 14th century. Right?
I wonder what changed.
I just told you that Chaucer and some other contemporaries.
Yeah, they started doing it, but what if they got inspiration from... That's just the first record, right?
Yeah, well...
Doesn't mean they created it.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're right about that. Yeah, I mean, we don't really know, like, what inspired that. I want to say that Chaucer's reference to a lover as his Valentine came from the fact that February, and specifically February 14th, was around the mating season of a lot of English birds. So that's kind of where that came from for him. Isn't that interesting? So perhaps that's all it was, you know? It's just one reference, and it set this massive domino fall into motion.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe it was just a slang term the street kids developed.
Well, no, and Shakespeare, his writings were full of slang, and it wouldn't have been unheard of for Chaucer or, you know, any of his contemporaries also to have used slang in their writing, even though we think of them today as incredibly formal and that kind of thing. That's just because of the importance of their literature that survived to our current culture here in the West and you know, what we understand. But that's not to say that they weren't using slang. Did you know that Shakespeare invented a lot of the words he used?
I do. You've told me before.
Oh, God, I love Shakespeare.
I know.
Oh, he's so good. Okay, so moving on, finishing up about this. So the thing is about that Pope who potentially wanted to, cover up Lupercalia, he did actually publicly speak out about it. He's recorded as having said some stuff about it, having said, like, I forget, I didn't make note of exactly how he said it, but he called it basically like immoral and all of those things. I mean, obviously he's the Pope. It was Pope Gelasius the First. Gelasius? Do you know? You went to Catholic school. Gelasius?
So I need to know all the popes throughout history?
I don't know what they taught y'all. We had to know the presidents in public school. You might have had to know the popes.
Oh.
Same thing.
Because that's our politics.
You went to Catholic school.
Yeah, they gave us little saint trading cards and...
Did they?
No.
I would have believed it. Anyway, so Pope Gelasius I, he spoke out about it, and then he actually said, so some early Christians were wanting to still be Christians but still celebrate Lupercalia. Like it was a tradition. It was a cultural thing, you know. These were people in Italy, in Rome. This is still, like I said, 5th century CE. And they wanted to take part in this, but still have their faith in, you know, Christian ideals, whatever. So there was this big hubbub about it, and there were a lot of people saying, like, just let them do it, let them have their way, let them do whatever they want, it's not harming anything. And the Pope said, if you want them to be able to celebrate Lupercalia so bad, why don't you politicians, get out there and strip down naked in the streets like you're supposed to for the holiday and run around, and then tell me they should be able to celebrate Lupercalia. That's what he said. I'd be like, all right, brother, let's go. Why not?
No, not everyone's probably down for that.
Well, obviously, that's why nakedness, you know, went out of style with the holiday. Probably, I would guess, because the celebration lasted for around, like, 800 years in the under the title, I suppose, of Lupercalia. You know, I'm sure that there are other rituals and traditions that led to it and that kind of thing. But Lupercalia, as we know, lasted from about 2 BC to 5th century, or not 2 BC, the 2nd century BC to the 5th century CE. So that's about, 700 years, right? So, like we said, it evolved, it changed, whatever. But I'm sure there are probably older rituals and customs that contributed to it that led to, but it was a big part of the culture, and that's why those Italian Roman Christians still wanted to celebrate it. But the Pope said, no, thank you. So anyway, a lot of people think that the Pope created St. Valentine's Day to replace it, as many popes did for many pagan holidays. But, and like we've said, this is made more believable by the fact that it is, first of all, on the 14th and the 15th of February, but also that Valentine's Day came around the same time. St. Valentine was martyred around the same time, especially, and that the last record of Lupercalia was around the same time as Pope Gelasius's reign. But even, like we said, if that was the case, that he put that St. Valentine's feast day to supersede it, like we said, there's no record of romance being associated with Valentine's Day until the 4th century. So, to me, like I said, this time last year, I was all for them being connected. Just like completely like generational. One being born of the other. But I don't know so much now. I researched way more. But to me, it kind of feels like, I wrote this down. I think it's funny that the popes, the Christian church as an institution, always wanted to replace pagan holidays. Like, I get it. You're bringing things through, like with Christmas. We have the Christmas tree, and we have the lighting of candles, and we have the Yule log, and we have feasting and all of these things. And those are all pagan traditions, right? That were brought through to make the transition easier for pagans into Christian holidays. That totally makes sense. But if we're just replacing Lupercalia, which is like this massive party, with Valentine's Day, which is about loving one person, that's like throwing a boring party. No, I'm sorry. It's not a boring party. But that's like throwing one kind of party to undercut your enemy's rager of a party over there. Like, even if people do only want to celebrate one person, which one do you think they're probably going to want to go to, you know?
The orgy.
That's what I'm saying. This has been the episode. So what do you think? Do you still think they're connected?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're similar. I don't care if people find small little objections and things they're not agreeing on.
Do you have any further thoughts on Lupercalia, on the celebration? Any questions maybe left over?
No.
No? What are you getting me for Valentine's Day?
No.
No? You're not getting me a coffee frother?
Maybe, maybe not.
You getting me an
What's it
espresso
to
machine?
You? No.
Oh, I would really love that.
I bet.
The only reason I want that is because you said you were thinking about getting one.
For us.
Obviously, it would be for us. I'm not the only one allowed to use the coffee frother. All right, thank you, Adam, very much for participating tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I love you.
I love you.
So, Guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of I've Been Thinking, co-hosted by Adam Krabs, my partner in
Crime.
I hope that you all follow along wherever you're listening, subscribe, follow whatever the deal is there. Check us out on Instagram at I've Been Thinking Pod. Check us out on Facebook, I've Been Thinking with Elena Grace. On TikTok, I'm at I've Been Elena. You can see pod content there as well as a variety of other chaotic stuff. And then, of course, always check out the blog, I'veBeenThinkingPod.com, for details, for sources, all of that good stuff. Make sure you come back next time to hear another super interesting episode about what I've been thinking about. And in the meantime, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/I've Been Thinking Pod, for exclusive content, video content, all kinds of good stuff there. Tyler and I are going to start a new series on Patreon, in case you didn't hear already, and that is going to be really, really exciting. We're going to start talking about books and movies on there, the two of us. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to try one out, right now, basically. You'll be able to listen to it in a few days if you're listening to this episode right when it comes out. And we're going to try out a Mystery Science Theater kind of vibe. We're really excited about it. That's Adam trying to quietly make himself a burrito. So, anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening always. I love you guys, and I'll talk at you next time. Thank you all so very much for listening, as always. This has been an episode of I've Been Thinking with Elena Grace. I'm your host, Elena Grace. We are produced and edited by Tyler Miller, and we are proudly presented by Stoveleg Media.
Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist, and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.